Good day, fish tankers. Prevention is always better than cure. Quite a long while back I had a disease outbreak in this tank. It was a nightmare, but the disease came in from new fish. And why did that happen? Because I didn't quarantine. Now, if you go and you buy your fish, look in the shop. If there's any sick fish in a tank, don't buy from that tank, even though the fish that you're looking at is fine. Rather leave that tank alone. And if you have a shop that quarantines their fish in a special quarantine section, that would be a bonus. Usually the best you can hope for is that they put the fish there with a sticker that says under quarantine for a day or two after they come from the wholesalers, and then it's a free for all. But the way to prevent this is to have a quarantine tank. A tank that's maybe not always running permanently, but you can just put the fish in while they acclimatize or while they wait to go into your bigger tank, so that you can see if there's any diseases. When you can treat it in the smaller tank, you use less medication and you don't infect your established fish. Like yes, we see here, this is a very good example of a quarantine tank sent by one of our viewers. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but how do you do that? Stick around and let's find out. Okay, now firstly, I've seen a lot of videos where they advise you to save costs to get some of these plastic totes that you use in your garage to store tools and all sorts of other paraphernalia, and you make a quick, cheap quarantine tank out of that. That's certainly a very good idea, although I wouldn't do it, because while the fish are under quarantine, I want to observe them properly, so I want to see them from the side. That's why I'll stick with a glass tank. But obviously you're going to go a bit cheaper here. You're just going to get the cheapest tank you can find. If it's for your run-of-the-mill community fish, then I would say a 10-gallon tank or 1.5 foot is fine. If you're going to keep bigger fish, then maybe it's a bigger issue. Now, if you have a new tank and the first fish are introduced, you're not going to quarantine them, because obviously their introduction is going to be the quarantine process. So the second batch of fish is where you're going to start quarantining them. Now, how do you do that? Now, I would say the setup has to be right first, because you don't want to stress them out even more in the quarantine tank. Now, as we can see, this is a perfect sort of setup. There's a small filter running in there, and there's plastic plants and it's bare bottom. You don't want to have a substrate, you don't need that, but you don't want the fish feeling exposed. So have some plastic plants if it's fish like loaches who like to do in little caves, and put a few pieces of PVC or just one of these pre-bought caves in the tank, and there has to be some filtration, because if there's going to be ammonia in your quarantine tank or nitrite, it's just going to make the situation worse. So you need a pre-seeded filter. Now, if you use the quarantine tank that you see here, you see is a little power filter. It runs on a little sponge. I would run that filter in my main tank for quite a while, so that it can become seeded and that it does have beneficial bacteria. Or just take the sponge out and put it in one of these hang-on bags in your canister, leave it there for 4 weeks, then you'll have a seeded filter. So that's also an idea that I have with these extra sponge filters in among my normal filtration. So if I need to do a quarantine tank, I take out one of these sponge filters out of a main tank, I just put it in a quarantine tank. But make sure that in a quarantine tank you run a filter with seeded media, so that it is run in. But we're not going to use any substrate. We're just going to have hiding spaces for fish. Obviously we're going to need a heater as well. And if the fish are jumpers, it's always a good idea to have a lid anyway to prevent too much evaporation. So I would do that as well. So we have a tank, we have a heater, we have a seeded filter, we have some hiding places and a lid. And then you just put it in a quiet place in the home. There's one extra thing that I will do. You'll see these cheaper Darrow tanks that we have here in South Africa. They come with a piece of polystyrene on the bottom to prevent pressure points. Now, that white polystyrene, when there's no substrate reflects upwards, reflects light upwards towards the fish, and it can make some fish skittish. So I'll just go and get an aquarium mat like the one here, or even just a yoga mat that is colored black, or at least a very dark color, and get rid of that piece of polystyrene and put the aquarium mat and the yoga mat underneath a glass bottom. Then it doesn't reflect from upwards through the fish, and the fish usually are a lot less stressed. You want to minimize stress. When you get them in the quarantine tank, and what do you do now? There are two schools of thought, and you guys must tell me in the comment section, what do you think? The one school of thought, and I would say a good period for quarantine would be around 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, keep them in that tank. The one school of thought is just to watch the fish and observe them, and if they're feeding and they're fine after those 4 weeks, you introduce them into the main tank. I kind of tend to lean towards that school. The other school of thought, like you see the aquarium co-op, you guys in America has got the aquarium co-op trio, you treat them just in case for bacterial diseases and internal and external parasites. Now, I'm not too sure, but I'm not fond of the idea of treating fish just because if you don't see any disease, because I think those disease-causing organisms might become resistant to the medications. I'm not a professor of biochemistry, or I'm not a scientist. It's not my subject. It's just my way of thinking. You know, myself, I don't take medication if I don't need to. I don't just take it. Yeah. But what I would do maybe, if you have fish that are wild caught, like some rainbow fish, and also definitely some puffers, like pea puffers and the bigger puffers, they can be notorious for this, and sometimes live bearers as well. I would treat them against internal parasites. Now, there's two things. You can deworm them. There's a product called Aquarium Smith here in South Africa, and you deworm them, and it paralyzes the worms. They secrete them, and you just siphon it out. And there's another method that I also use, and that is using metronidazole. The proprietary Seachem one is Metroplex. And then you mix it with some frozen food. The food's got to be wet a little bit. You mix it with some frozen food, and then you have to bind it to the frozen food. In the old days, we used to mix the metronidazole with frozen food, but then the fish would spit them out and they'd be all over the place. So mix with the frozen food, bind it with something called Seachem Focus, add that as well, and now you've got to mask the taste from the fish. Put some garlic gourd in there and take that whole mixture and feed that to the fish for a week. If you have fish that are prone to internal parasites, and that I would say wild caught fish like puffers, rainbow fish are prone to that, and live bearers these days as well, I would keep a watch out. But that is really, if I don't see external signs of disease in the quarantine tank, that's the only thing I would do with some fish. I would just observe them, and then from there put them in the tank. Well, I hope that was helpful to you. Please remember to subscribe, and until I see you guys again, take good care of those domestic denizens of the deep.